Marlene Daniels paid for her first-class seat fair and square, but when she was quietly asked to move to the back of the plane, she didn't make a scene. The rest of the plane did, and the internet wasn't far behind. Marlene Daniels wasn't a woman who asked for much. She never had. Not when she spent 32 years working in Birmingham public schools, and not when she raised 3 children on a teacher's salary after her husband passed. She was steady. She was strong. And now, at 72, she had finally learned to do something she'd always told others to do: take up space. That's why she splurged on the ticket. Her granddaughter, Aaliyah, was graduating from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana, the first in the family to earn a degree in environmental engineering. It was a big deal. And Marlene? She was going to be there, front and center, wearing her Sunday best, cheering like she used to at those dusty high school basketball games. She'd flown before, sure, but always in coach, always quiet, always practical. This time, though, she booked a first-class seat. Paid in full. Chose her spot by the window. It wasn't about luxury. It was about presence. It was her way of saying, "I'm still here. I matter." Walking through the gate at Birmingham Shuttlesworth Airport, she looked like someone who knew who she was. Grey slacks, a pearl grey sweater, small gold earrings, and the kind of leather handbag that showed signs of years of good care. Her hair, silver and neat, was pulled into a low twist. She smiled at the gate agent. Not because she had to, but because she believed in being kind, even when people weren't always kind back. "Good morning, Miss Daniels," the agent said, scanning her ticket. She liked the sound of that. Ms. Daniels. It still held weight. As she boarded the plane, a few passengers in the front cabin glanced up. Some smiled. A man in his 40s gave a polite nod. Across the aisle, a younger woman in a denim jacket and chunky boots was flipping through a magazine. Marlene found her seat, 2A, and settled in. She placed her bag gently under the seat in front of her, smoothed her sweater, and looked out the window. The sky was clear. That felt like a good sign. The flight attendants were moving up and down the aisle, organizing luggage, offering small talk. One handed her a water bottle. "First time in first class?" she asked, with a smile that felt more routine than real. Marlene chuckled softly. "Is it that obvious?" "Not at all. You look great. Just wanted to say welcome." Marlene nodded politely and turned back toward the window. She was thinking about Aaliyah's smile, about how fast the years had gone. Just yesterday, it seemed, she was sitting in the front office of Jefferson Middle, watching her granddaughter spin in her chair while she filed reports. She leaned back, hands folded neatly in her lap. Everything felt still, clean, right. But then came the voice. "Excuse me, ma'am," said a flight attendant, different from the first one. Young, blonde, unreadable face. Marlene looked up. "I'm so sorry, but there seems to have been a seat assignment mix-up. I'm going to need you to move to seat 19C. Marlene blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "I'm sorry. What?" "There was an upgrade situation and a late passenger. The system put you in this seat by mistake. We need this one available." Marlene sat very still. Her voice didn't rise. Her eyes didn't narrow. She reached into her bag, pulled out the paper boarding pass she insisted on printing, and held it up. "This is my seat. 2A. Paid for. Chosen." The attendant glanced at it, then looked back down the aisle. "I understand, I really do, but we're just trying to fix this quickly before takeoff." From across the aisle, the woman in the denim jacket lowered her magazine. "I saw her sit there before anyone else boarded," she said quietly. Marlene didn't move. Not yet. Her fingers pressed against the arms of the chair, just firm enough to steady herself. "I'm not trying to make trouble," she said gently. "But I bought this seat months ago. It's mine." The attendant leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, if you could please cooperate, we'll get this sorted. We just need you to move for now." And then, without another word, a man appeared. Tall, white, neatly trimmed beard, dressed in business casual, holding a laptop bag and looking impatient. The attendant gave a small, practiced smile. "Right this way, sir." But Marlene hadn't moved. Not yet. Marlene's fingers remained curled tight around the armrests. She could hear the low rustle of passengers settling, zippers closing, safety belts clicking into place. But the air around her felt stiff, like it didn't want to move either. The man stood just inches from her seat now, looking down with a half-confused, half-irritated expression. "This is 2A, right?" he asked, glancing at the flight attendant, not Marlene. "Yes, sir," she answered. "Just a small mix-up. We're getting it handled now." Marlene spoke calmly, but her voice had steel in it. "Handled how?" The attendant tried to keep her tone light. "We just need you to take seat 19C. It's still a good seat, and we'll make sure you're compensated for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Marlene raised her eyebrows. "Being told to leave the seat I paid for in front of a full plane after I already sat down? That's not a minor issue." The man finally looked at her. He didn't say a word, just stared. And something about that silence, comfortable for him, uncomfortable for her, cut deep. "Ma'am," the flight attendant said again, her voice firmer this time. "Please." Marlene looked around. No one was speaking, but they were watching. The man from across the aisle looked uncomfortable now, shifting in his seat. The younger woman with the magazine was still staring. She didn't want to make a scene. That was never her style. She had always taught her students to rise above embarrassment with grace, not noise. But now, this moment, she wondered, what lesson would she be teaching if she quietly slipped away? Still, her pride couldn't hold up the entire flight. Marlene slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, picked up her bag, and stood. The flight attendant exhaled. Relieved. "Thank you," she said, and stepped aside as the man slid into the seat, opened his laptop, and adjusted his tie like nothing had happened. Marlene kept her back straight as she made her way down the narrow aisle, past rows of strangers who refused to make eye contact. She reached row 19, found seat C, and placed her bag beneath the seat in silence. The chair was smaller, closer to the restroom, loud, cramped, and nothing like what she'd planned for. She sat quietly, her eyes stinging. A man across the row, a teenager in headphones, glanced at her with a puzzled look. She offered a tired smile. Everything in her chest felt heavy, not because of the seat, but because she hadn't been surprised. She'd hoped, foolishly maybe, that things were different now. That at her age, after giving so much of herself to others, she wouldn't have to prove she deserved what she paid for. She looked down at her hands, slightly trembling. Her wedding band still rested on her finger, even after all these years. She had raised 3 children, 2 of whom were now professionals. She had poured her life into her students, writing letters to parents, staying late to tutor. She had broken up fights, buried students lost too soon, taught kids how to believe in themselves even when the world didn't. But here, on this plane, she was just someone to be moved out of the way. The captain came over the speaker, giving the usual welcome. Flight time to Indianapolis, 1 hour and 42 minutes. Seat backs upright, tray tables locked. Marlene leaned her head against the window. She didn't cry. She just stared. Then something shifted. "Excuse me?" It was the voice from earlier, the woman in the denim jacket. She had stood up. "Hi," she said, loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "What just happened here isn't sitting right with me." Marlene turned her head, surprised. The woman continued, pointing toward the front. "That lady had her seat first. I saw her check in and sit down. She had a printed boarding pass. And you all moved her? For what exactly?" There was a pause. Some passengers looked up now, clearly listening. The flight attendant walked quickly over, trying to calm the woman. "I understand your concern, but we're trying to keep things moving." "No," the woman said, louder now. "You moved her because you thought she wouldn't speak up. But I will. But she wasn't the only one anymore." The cabin, just seconds ago, filled with the quiet rustle of carry-ons and pre-flight chatter, now sat in stunned silence. Marlene didn't move. She stayed in 19C, unsure whether to feel mortified or grateful. Maybe both. She watched the woman, mid-30s, bold stance, eyes sharp with frustration, stand her ground. "I'm sorry," the woman went on, now addressing everyone in earshot. "But you can't pretend that didn't just happen. You moved that woman out of her paid seat, without explanation. And this man," she gestured toward 2A, "waltzed in like nothing." The man in the seat looked up briefly, adjusting his cufflinks. He didn't say a word. "I'd like to know why," the woman pressed. "And I'd like the rest of the plane to pay attention, because this isn't right." The flight attendant hesitated. She opened her mouth to speak, but then looked around. Passengers were turning their heads. Phones were coming out. A red-haired teenager 2 rows back had his camera pointed directly forward, recording without shame. A mother with a toddler leaned in and whispered to her husband. Eyes were shifting. Tension was rising. Then a voice from row 3 cut through. "She's right." A man, late 40s, beard peppered with grey, wearing a faded Detroit Tigers cap, stood up halfway from his seat. "I watched it too. She was there first. Boarding pass in hand. You moved her without cause, and frankly, I'm not okay with that." The flight crew exchanged glances. Another attendant, taller, older, maybe more experienced, stepped forward, placing a hand gently on the younger woman's arm. "We can speak to you about this once we're airborne," he said. The woman in denim didn't budge. "No, you speak now. This wasn't an error. This was a choice. And if no one else is going to say it, I will. That woman was moved because you thought she wouldn't make noise, because she's older. And let's be honest, because she's black." That last word landed like a slap across the silence. Marlene lowered her gaze. She felt heat crawl up her neck. She never liked being the center of anything. Not like this. Not for this reason. A voice came from the back. "That's messed up," a younger man mumbled. "Ain't no way that should have happened." Then someone else said it louder. "Give her seat back." The man in 2A shifted uncomfortably, finally putting his laptop away. He looked toward the flight crew. "Look, I don't need the seat if it's going to be a whole thing," he said. "I just took the one they told me to take." The bold woman scoffed. "You saw her get moved and didn't ask one question, not one." He shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Not my call." The flight attendant attempted damage control. "We understand emotions are high. Let us fix this without delay so we can depart on time." "No," the man in the tiger's cap interrupted. "Not before she gets her seat back." He turned and looked toward Marlene. "Ma'am," he said, "do you want your seat back?" She hesitated. She'd spent most of her life teaching others how to use their voice, to advocate for what's right. And now, hers was shaking. I don't want to be the reason this flight is delayed," she said softly. "You're not," the woman from row 2 replied. "You're the reason it might finally get it right." That was when it happened. The man in row 4 stood up, then a couple behind him. "If she doesn't get her seat," someone said. "We're not sitting either." Flight attendants began to panic. One picked up the phone to call the pilot. The doors hadn't closed yet, and protocol was now in full swing. The lead attendant came back, cheeks flushed. "We're going to have to pause boarding," another passenger added. "Too late. Plane's full. Fix it now." Marlene slowly stood. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. "I didn't ask for this," she said. "But I won't sit here and act like I didn't deserve what I paid for. I bought 2A. I checked in early. I followed every rule. I've followed every rule all my life." And just like that, the man in 2A stood up. He didn't say sorry. He didn't make eye contact. He just grabbed his laptop and walked toward the back of the plane. The crew moved quickly to get Marlene back up front. As she walked past, several passengers nodded at her. Some gave small words of support. "Good for you. You didn't deserve that." We saw. She took her seat in 2A again. The armrests felt different this time. Not stiff, not cold. But by the time the plane took off, someone had already uploaded the video. The plane climbed through the clouds, but the atmosphere inside the cabin stayed grounded in something else entirely. Marlene sat back in 2A, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't touched the complimentary drink. Didn't need it. Her thoughts were busy. She wasn't angry, not in the shouting way. She was thinking about her granddaughter, about the world Aaliyah was walking into with that degree, about all the ways this moment, This petty public embarrassment wasn't new, but something about it felt different this time. Somewhere back in row 18, the teenager with red hair had already uploaded a 23-second clip to TikTok, captioned simply, "They moved an old black woman out of her first-class seat for some dude. Whole plane said, nope." The comments were instant. "Nah, that's disgusting. She better get that seat back. What's the airline? Tag them, y'all." And by the time the flight touched down in Indiana, the video had been stitched by 3 influencers, shared by an account called Justice from the Aisle, and hit over 80,000 views. Marlene didn't know any of that. She was still adjusting her sweater and preparing to text Aaliyah when she reached the terminal. Her phone had been off the whole flight. As the passengers disembarked, several touched her arm gently in passing. "You're a class act. Glad they made it right." She thanked them softly, eyes warm but tired. She didn't quite know what to do with the attention. A part of her wanted to fade back into the airport crowd. Just catch her shuttle and ride into town. But the moment she turned her phone on, it buzzed. And buzzed again. Messages flooded in, some from her children, others from former co-workers, and even a few numbers she didn't recognize. Her youngest son, Louis, had called 3 times. She answered on the 4th ring. "Mama," he said, voice already hot with emotion. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." "Why?" "You're all over the internet. I mean everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Some girl got you standing up for yourself on video. You handled that with grace, Mama. I'm proud of you." Marlene's chest tightened. "I didn't even know she was filming. She caught everything. They tried to bump you for a seat you paid for, and people are not having it." She paused, breathing deep. "I didn't do anything special." "Yeah, you did," Louis said. "You didn't let them shrink you." By the time she made it to the parking area where her shuttle was waiting, she had missed 5 more calls. One was from a local reporter in Indiana. 2 were from media outlets she didn't recognize. Someone named Mia from The Morning Circle had emailed her twice already. Marlene lowered her phone into her lap, letting the shuttle rock slightly as it pulled away from the curb. In the seat next to her sat a college-aged black woman with thick braids and a Purdue hoodie. She glanced at Marlene, did a quick double-take, then turned slightly in her seat. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, tentative. "Were you the woman on the plane today? The one that video's about?" Marlene's eyebrows lifted. "That fast?" The girl grinned. "People share what matters. And that mattered." Marlene hesitated. "It's strange. I didn't plan on being part of anything like this." "You didn't plan it," the girl said gently. "But you handled it in a way a lot of us needed to see." Marlene smiled, then looked out the window at the passing billboards and highway signs. She was just trying to get to a graduation. And now the whole country was talking. But the airline? They were quiet. Too quiet. By the time Marlene reached her hotel in Lafayette, her name was already in the subject lines of press releases. Not officially, of course. No company wanted to admit anything that might cost them. But the airline, Coastal Air, knew what was happening. They'd seen the clips, they'd read the comments, and they'd scrambled behind closed doors. Marlene's phone rang again as she stepped into the elevator. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. She was tired. She had flown across 2 states, been embarrassed, then applauded, then swept into something she hadn't asked for. All she wanted now was a warm shower, a meal she didn't have to cook, and to see Aaliyah cross that stage. Her room overlooked a small park. Families walked dogs, students tossed frisbees. The sun was dipping behind the trees. Marlene watched for a moment before sitting down and turning on the TV. Local news was already on it. The video, which has now reached over 2.3 million views in less than 12 hours, shows what appears to be an elderly black woman being asked to move from her assigned seat in the first-class cabin to accommodate a younger white passenger. Passengers on board intervened, and the woman was eventually returned to her original seat. She muted it. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from Louis. "Coastal Air just put out a statement. It's weak." She opened the link. The official post read, We are aware of the incident on board Flight 482 today, involving a seat assignment confusion. Coastal Air is committed to fair and inclusive treatment for all passengers and is reviewing internal procedures. We apologize for any inconvenience experienced. Inconvenience, she whispered, shaking her head. That word again. She remembered all the times she'd written real apologies in her career, when a teacher lost their temper, when a parent was left unheard. She never used that word, not when harm had been done. That night, she finally answered a call. Marlene Daniels? The voice was clear and firm. Female. Professional. Yes, speaking. This is Nina Morgan. I'm a producer with Midday Matters. We'd love to have you on our show tomorrow morning. Just to speak briefly about your experience. Nothing invasive. You've become a symbol of something bigger, and people are listening. Marlene paused. I'm not a symbol, she said. I'm a grandmother who got moved out of her seat. I know, Nina replied, with a softness that sounded genuine. That's why it means something. She declined the interview, at least for now. But something inside her stirred. She had spent her life helping others find their voice. Maybe now was her turn to use hers again. The next morning, she wrote something by hand. It wasn't long, just a page, but every word was deliberate. She began with, I wasn't trying to go viral. I was trying to visit my granddaughter. She talked about dignity, about how easy it is to forget older people, about what it feels like to be pushed aside, not for the first time, but for the 1000th. And she ended with this. I spent decades telling young people they mattered, that their presence mattered, that they belonged. I still believe that, but sometimes the ones who forget are not the students. It's the people who think they're in charge. She gave the letter to Lewis, who posted it on his social media with her permission. By lunch, it had over 400,000 shares. Talk shows mentioned her. An op-ed in the Indianapolis Journal praised her poise. Civil rights advocates were quoting her letter at events. One comment stuck with her. It came from a woman named Danielle in Topeka. My mother was pushed out of a line at the bank once and just laughed it off. She said, people like us don't make noise. I wish she'd lived to see this. Thank you, Ms. Daniels. You reminded me to stop laughing things off. Marlene sat by the window, phone in hand, the letter in her lap. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't marched, she hadn't filmed a video. She had just told the truth, but the moment that truly mattered to her hadn't come yet. It was waiting on a campus stage. Saturday morning came crisp and clear. Not that Marlene had slept much. Between the news coverage, the messages, and the feeling of being watched by a million strangers she couldn't see, rest had been hard to find. But her feet were steady as she stepped onto the campus of Purdue University, and her heart was set on one thing, Aaliyah. She wore a navy blue dress and a matching hat, the same one she'd saved for something special. This was that something. She didn't care if people recognized her now. Let them. Today wasn't about her. It was about watching her granddaughter take that walk. The stadium seating was nearly full by the time she found her row. A security guard walked over, looked at her a moment too long, then smiled. Ms. Daniels? Yes? I just wanted to say thank you, he said. Saw the video. I'm glad you stood your ground. She gave a warm nod. Appreciate that. I'm here for my granddaughter. He reached into his pocket. The Dean of Students asked me to walk you to a reserved section. For family. Better view. Marlene hesitated. Reserved for who? He grinned. You. She followed him up to the front rows, just behind the stage, where a simple seat was marked with a folded card. Mrs. Marlene Daniels. Guest of honor. She blinked, heart catching. Not a spotlight, not a podium, just a seat. But it was hers. Offered, not taken. Soon the ceremony began. Names were called, gowns swayed, cheers echoed. And then, Aaliyah Denise Daniels. The name rang through the air like a church bell. Marlene stood as her granddaughter stepped forward, tall, radiant, eyes gleaming under the weight of her own accomplishment. She caught sight of her grandmother, and for a split second that proud smile faltered. only to come back fuller, brighter, and glistening with tears. After the ceremony, the family gathered under a cluster of trees near the quad. Her sons were already arguing over who was taking who to dinner. Her daughter-in-law was fussing with her youngest's shirt. Aaliyah rushed toward her and wrapped her arms around her grandmother's waist, nearly knocking the hat off her head. "You made it," she whispered. "Of course I did," Marlene replied. "You think a seat mix-up was going to keep me away?" They laughed, held on longer than necessary. Aaliyah stepped back, eyes shimmering. "I saw everything, Grandma. The videos, the letter. I've been getting messages from people at school, professors, classmates, people I don't even know. You made people talk." "I didn't try to," Marlene said. "I just didn't want to be quiet anymore." Aaliyah nodded. "Maybe we don't always need to shout. But when we speak, people should listen." Later that afternoon, while packing up her things back at the hotel, Marlene received a formal letter slipped under her door. It was embossed with the Coastal Air logo. Inside was an offer, an invitation to speak at their annual Equity and Training Summit. All expenses paid. They called it an opportunity to elevate the conversation. She read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her purse. The next day, she called the number provided. "Ms. Daniels, we're honored you returned our call," said a representative. "We'd love for you to be our guest speaker. Your story, your grace, has moved thousands." "I'm flattered," Marlene said plainly, "but I won't be attending." The woman on the other end paused. "May I ask why?" "I wasn't moved to speak for your company," she said. "I spoke because my dignity didn't fit in row 19. She ended the call gently and sat down at the edge of the bed, watching a small group of children playing in the park across the street. The wind was tossing leaves in lazy circles. She didn't need a platform. She'd already made her point, and without saying so, it was clear. This time, the seat wasn't taken from her. It was offered. She just chose not to sit in it. But there was one last thing she needed to say. Not to the airline, not to reporters, to all of us. The morning she flew back home, Marlene sat quietly by the airport window, watching the movement on the tarmac. Luggage carts, fuel trucks, a slow taxiing plane with its belly full of stories no one would ever know. She sipped coffee from a paper cup, her hands steady now. The chaos had died down. News cycles had shifted, trending topics replaced her face with newer headlines. But that was fine. Marlene hadn't done what she did to stay in the spotlight. She had done it because something in her refused to shrink anymore. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from someone she didn't know. A woman in Arizona. A retired nurse. The message was simple. "I've spent my whole life apologizing before I even spoke. Thank you for reminding me I don't have to." Marlene read it twice, then closed the phone and looked around the terminal. People walked past her, tugging carry-ons, sipping lattes, holding tight to children's hands. Most didn't recognize her. She wasn't wearing anything fancy, just her same grey sweater and pearl earrings. But if you looked closely, there was something in the way she sat, a steadiness that couldn't be measured in posture alone. She thought back to all the years she'd spent telling her students they mattered, telling young black girls to walk tall, speak clearly, and never let anyone make them small. She thought she had stopped teaching when she retired. She was wrong. Dignity doesn't need to be earned. It doesn't come from status or titles or who you know. It isn't granted by strangers, and it certainly isn't up for negotiation when it becomes inconvenient to someone else. It belongs to you, whether people recognize it or not. That was the lesson, not just for the people who watched her move through that plane aisle, but for the quiet ones, the people who've swallowed their pride 1,000 times in checkout lines, boardrooms, waiting rooms, the people who've been told in small, subtle ways that they should give up their seat, literally or not, to someone more important. Marlene's story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It wasn't even about that man or that airline. It was about the moment she decided she didn't owe anyone her silence. Before her flight boarded, She stood and stretched. A young girl nearby tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "That's the lady from the video." Marlene smiled. Not a wide smile, not one that asked for attention, just the kind of smile that says, "I know who I am." As she walked toward the gate, the same flight attendant from her original trip passed by, different uniform, different day. The woman glanced up, recognition flickering in her eyes. She gave a quick nod. Marlene simply said, "Good morning." No more, no less. She didn't need a speech. She didn't need applause. She had something better. Peace. As the gate opened and boarding began, Marlene didn't rush. She waited her turn. She walked slowly, and when she reached her row, yes, first class again, she placed her bag beneath the seat, sat down, and looked out the window. The sky was wide open. She didn't speak another word the whole flight, because she didn't need to. Sometimes the loudest statement you can make is to keep your seat, especially when the world expects you to give it up. So if you're listening to this and you've ever been made to feel smaller just for standing your ground, remember Marlene Daniels. Not because she went viral, but because she never raised her voice and still, everyone heard her. If this story meant something to you, share it. Speak when you can. Stay seated when you must. And above all else, don't let anyone decide when your dignity shows up.